Little technical difficulties getting in.
I know.
Yes, I had some problems as well.
Okay, great. Great. All right, everyone, welcome and good morning. My name is Erin Wortman. I am the president of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I want to welcome you all to the Wednesday, April 28th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting to order. Just a little housekeeping. The Executive Committee is being conducted remotely via Zoom. That's why we're all here. Consistent with the governor's executive order of March 12th, 2020, which is wild that it was 13 months ago, to provide public access to the meeting while limiting the potential abuse of video conferencing technology, members of the public may view the proceedings at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. And if anyone, is having trouble sleeping at night or just enjoys this kind of content, they're welcome to view the recording in syndication on YouTube as well. So thank you all again for joining. I know that there were some technical difficulties logging in, and I do want to apologize for that. And, as people may come in late, we totally get it. So we're just doing the best we can here. So with that being said, the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from March 17th, 2021. Oh, I didn't do attendance yet. Hold on, sorry. Let's do attendance first, shall we? Because this is a Zoom meeting. I will read off everyone's name. If everyone could just unmute, and we're going to kind of rapid fire this. And for those of us that are new or maybe out of practice, also keep in mind I have to do roll call for every vote here on out. So ready to go? Here's the roll call. Sharonda Almeida.
Aye.
John Barrows. Keith Bergman.
Present.
Karen Canfield.
Here.
Adam Chapdelaine. Absent. Bob Cohen.
Here.
Mayor Curtatone. Tom Daniel.
Here.
John DePriest.
Here.
Yolanda Greaves.
Here.
Sandra Hackman.
Here.
Mo Handel.
Here.
Jared Johnson. Tabor Keeley.
Here.
Steve Olenoff.
Yeah.
Caitlin Pasafaro. George Proakis. Courtney Rainey.
Oh, I'm here. Sorry. A little late.
Oh,
on
it's
the button.
No big deal, George. Thank you. Courtney Rainey.
Present.
Great. Jenny Ray.
Here.
Vandana Rao.
Present.
Sam Seidel.
Here.
Steve Silvera.
Here.
Lauren Shurtleff. Mayor Spicer.
Here.
Juan Vega. Elaine Vanya.
Here.
And me, Erin Wortman, present. What a great showing today. Thank you so much, everyone. So now the next order of business is the approval of minutes for March 17th, 2021.
So moved.
Motion made by Bob Cohen. Can I have a second? Who made that second? Yolanda?
Yolanda.
All right. Thank you, Yolanda. Is there any discussion or... Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we have a motion on the floor from Bob and a second from Yolanda. Please unmute everyone. I'm going to go really quick on this vote. Sharonda.
Aye.
John, absent. Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Adam, absent. Bob Cohen.
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone. Tom Daniel.
Yes.
John DePriest.
Yes.
Yolanda.
Yes.
Sandra.
Yes.
Mo.
Yes.
Jared. Tabor.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Caitlin Pasafaro.
Yes.
George.
Yes.
Courtney.
Yes.
Jenny.
Yes.
Vandana.
Yes.
Sam.
Yes.
Steve Silvera.
Yes.
Lauren. Mayor Spicer.
Yes.
Juan. Elaine.
Yes.
Erin. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you so much, everyone. Next up on the agenda is the report of the treasurer, and I'm going to call on Treasurer Sam.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, President Aaron, and hello to everybody. This treasurer's report will include two income statements, the one from February and the one from March, and I believe you've gotten both of those. I'll start with February and report in the February income statement that there's really not much to report. We were pretty much right on budget across the board, both in terms of direct labor, admin expenses, and revenues. And that the balance there left us with an overhead rate of 119%, which is good because it's below the 123% our approved overhead rate. And it left us with a cumulative overhead rate of 122%, which is also good because it will give us a little room as we get into these last months of the fiscal year. That pretty much covers February. I think what I'll do is just move on to March, and then if there are any questions or comments, we could do those then. The March income statement is interesting in the sense that the total revenue was much higher than budget. It came in at 167%, and there's a reason for that. As did our direct labor come in above budget at 115%. Both of these numbers are interesting in the sense that they're above budget. The revenue number is really accounted for by the fact that there was a lot of pass-through money that happened in the month of March. That included the Taxi Transportation Partnership Program, in which 1.2 million was moved through the budget in the month of March. And also Homeland Security was finishing out its spending with 900,000 closing out the fiscal year 18, and all of that happened in the month of March. So that explains the higher number on the revenue side. On the direct labor side, Sheila, I talked briefly with Sheila, and she said that this number seemed high to her. She went back, checked all her numbers, and it is in fact correct. And her thinking is that it accounts for, it's accounted by new people on board actually doing work. The fact that there are no holidays in the month of March, and March is a full month at 31 days. And also that schools are back in session. So people who otherwise might have to spend some workday time with kids have more time during the day to actually focus on projects. The net result of all of this is that our overhead rate went down to 115%, which is really a substantial drop. And it sets us up for the cumulative rate of 121%, which Sheila was explaining to me is good because it just gives us a little bit more room as we come to these last couple of months where we can go up to 123%, our approved rate. That pretty much covers the treasurer's report for the months of February and March. And I'd entertain any questions or.
A motion to approve the treasurer's report.
I hear a motion from Robert, second from John. Aaron, I'll hand this back to you for the vote.
Thanks, Sam. And as long as there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any, I will move on. So Bob Cohen made that motion and John DePriest made the second. So please unmute everyone. Sharonda?
Aye.
John Barrows, Keith?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Adam's absent. Bob?
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone? Tom Daniel?
Yes.
John DePriest?
Yes.
Yolanda?
Yes.
Sandra?
Yes.
Mo?
Yes.
Jared? Tabor?
Yes.
Steve Olenoff?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Courtney?
Yes.
Jenny?
Yes.
Vandana?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Lauren? Mayor Spicer?
Yes.
Juan? Elaine?
Yes.
And Erin? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you so much to the finance team and Treasurer Sam. Really appreciate it. Okay, next up is the report of the executive director. And for this meeting, I don't want to say playing the role of executive director, but filling in as executive director is Rebecca. Mark had something kind of pop up last minute. So Rebecca is going to fill in. So Rebecca?
Great. Thank you, Erin, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I thought I would start the report really kind of framing it around last week, which was Climate Week across the country, and kind of talk through, I think, some of the highlights you'll see really through so many of our departments kind of in the climate space. So first, a major props to our comms, clean energy, environment, public health, and transportation teams. We had a really busy Climate Week. We actually had our first in-person press conference and event. It was so nice to see some of my colleagues. We were in a parking lot in Lynn, but it was still really wonderful to see everybody. And, really that was a culmination of 10 years of effort on LED streetlights. John, I'll look at you from Chelsea. You might remember our first project 10 years ago was helping Chelsea buy streetlights from the city of Boston. 10 years ago, it was a brand new technology. And last week we celebrated the fact that we have now converted all of the municipally owned streetlights across the Commonwealth to LED. So that 10 years of efforts, over $5 million a year saved, and tons of GHG. So it's a real win-win, and a huge props to Kara Goodman on our team, who has helped 75 communities with that process, working with the DPW, procurement, streetlight inventory. It's not just changing bulbs. And so exciting to see that culmination. Additionally, we celebrated the 5-year anniversary of the Metro Mayor's Climate Preparedness, now Climate Task Force, really a first in the nation regional effort that set back in 2016 a net zero by 2050 goal. And we had a wonderful celebration event with all of the mayors, really reflecting on the progress that we've made over the last 5 years. And additionally, and I think you'll hear a little bit about this in the legislative report, but I just wanted to give my personal congratulations to Leah and Cami and Lizzie. We had our landmark climate legislation pass for the 3rd time, but finally signed. And what I would say about that, and just for folks to understand, is that we at MAPC, I think, played a critical role in retaining the net zero stretch code, and actually in the end strengthening that provision despite very strong opposition from our friends in the real estate community. So I'm really proud of that effort, and clearly there's going to be a lot of work to be had to make sure as we go through the regulatory process we get a strong code, and then all of the work of adoption with our cities and towns. But a real special shout out to Leah and Cami on that one. It was a tremendous amount of work. Moving on to kind of other highlights, we had our Community Safety Day on the Hill, and that is with our advocacy for our Shannon Grant program. It is always my favorite day on the Hill, and we normally bring hundreds of kids up to Beacon Hill to talk about the importance of these programs to really provide opportunities to youth. The virtual event, which Austin Murray and Diego Hueso put together, was full of life, and we actually had a Patriots player join us for the first time. So it was a really successful event. I think there were over 50 legislators. So really showing that we can turn and bring out folks together virtually. We also, shout out to Sasha Parodi, who I know is on here, we had our Women in the Workforce event, a tremendous event really thinking about the impacts of the pandemic on women, and particularly women of color and low-income women. We had over, I think, close to 150 people on, although I'll say only 15 of them were men. So next time around, I'll look to some of you to join us, but it was a really fabulous event. And we had Senate President Karen Spilka join us, along as a lot of other leaders. So a real success there. And then finally, kind of turning towards our COVID work, really we are starting to focus on recovery. Our economic development team has started a number of local recovery grants, and we are starting and launching 3 digital access grants in the communities of Chelsea, Everett, and Revere. So really starting to look at digital divide. It's a new area of work for MAPC, and I'm excited to kind of see the growth that we can have there. And then finally, on our public health side, we continue to work really hard, particularly on trying to coordinate the response on vaccinations. We are meeting weekly. Mark Fine from our team is getting kind of the bulk of that work with the Lieutenant Governor, Secretary Sutters, and municipal leaders to think about vaccine rollout coordination, how to improve access, particularly in our hardest hit communities. And we've put together a really great tool with our digital services team that provides up-to-date vaccination information broken out by town and demographics to help inform our municipal leaders as they really think about targeting their response moving forward, particularly now that there's a lot of access and we really have to go out and reach people where they are, kind of keep track of how we're doing across demographics within cities and towns so that we can create more targeted strategies. So just some highlights, but read the report. March numbers were so good, as Sam said, and that's because people are working really hard and there's a tremendous amount of work being done. Thanks, Erin.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Are there any questions for Rebecca before we move on?
Can I ask a question, Rebecca?
Go ahead, Bob.
So Rebecca, everyone is working fantastic and I'm happy about that. People working remotely. I think I asked this question before in a previous meeting. We bought a lot of licenses for people to work remotely. Are these annual licenses or do we have to buy them again?
Yeah, so yes, and I mean, they're both. So we're actually, I know we just voted on the mid-year budget, but we're actually right now doing next year's budget. We're in that process and we will have to balance, as I said before, there are a lot of new costs that are both annual. Some of them are the kind of costs that we can use through depreciation. We can put them out through a number of years, like our new servers and some of those upgrades. But other, like the technology, like DocuSign or Seamless, we've removed all of our processing of paper remote, right? Which honestly, it's so much better. And it was like a good, thank you to Sheila and her team. It was a ton of work, but I think it's making us work much more effectively. So we're going to have to balance those costs together with the in-person costs, right? We saved a lot of money, for example, by not having T-passes. I think the major thing and the numbers that you see in March is that, we were carrying a lot of cost in terms of leave and really trying to help support, a number of different kinds of leave that people needed this year. That was the major administrative cost that we carried over the last year that was so unexpected. And I'm really hopeful that I think in the next fiscal year, we won't have the same level of cost in that space.
Right, and that's fine. And I love the productivity and the being able to work remotely. And my clients are all working remotely, and it's much better. I just wondered if our overhead rate that was mentioned as being low, if that would be continued. But Sam, you got the veto pen.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a real balancing act, and we're going to go back hybrid, I think is the word we're using. So our plan is not to be a fully remote agency. I couldn't survive that. I know it's too much Zoom, and I even last week being able to see those colleagues in person, it just reminded me of all of the things that we're missing, all of the ways that we can kind of get work done in a more informal way sometimes when we're not. When we actually are together and not remote. And so we're kind of trying to balance those costs. I do think big savings. I mean, we're expanding staff right now. And we were looking at, I think, some significant concerns about staffing, space constraints. And I'm really hoping that with this hybrid normal that we're returning to, we will be able to really lessen some of those additional costs that we would have had for new space.
Thank you, Rebecca. That answers my question. And just FYI, I see George popped on the screen. Hey, George, I sent you a text. So can you send me a text back? Thanks, Doc.
I'll look. And Rebecca, can I use the point that Robert called me out to ask you a question now?
Sure.
About the report? You mentioned about the vaccination situation and working with the lieutenant government and local governments. And I'm somewhat, but not completely involved day to day in a lot of the conversations in Somerville. It is clear from the data that you're pulling out there and that we're collecting that minority communities of color are not receiving vaccines at the same rate that white populations are. There's some conversation about adjusting that for age and sort of figuring out how that goes across the board. We're definitely seeing it in Somerville. We keep having a lot of conversations about delivering more vaccines back to local government, to have local health departments put them out there. I know, we've all been a part of those conversations. What is the status of that at this point? I mean, I know that the mass vaccination sites are vaccinating a lot of people, but there was a feeling that we're not getting them into the neighborhoods in certain circumstances. Where are we? Do you have any insight on how that conversation's going?
I mean, I think we are making progress, and I think that in the 20 hard hit communities, and I'd ask Mayor Spicer if she wanted to comment on that there has been a real concerted effort, and that, you know, there is a lot of vaccine, you know, particularly they are getting their own doses, and then, you know, there's a lot of vaccine flowing through the community health centers. I think where we're struggling, and Somerville really falls into this, George, is that in the non-hard hit communities, there are still hard hit populations. You know, Somerville and Cambridge are two that really just come to mind, where we really need more doses, particularly at the local level, so that we can get out. You know, Salem is another one, I see Tom, that comes to mind, so that we can get out into the community. And really, it is an access issue. I don't think it's a hesitancy issue.
Right.
And we have been advocating very hard for that. We created a regional collaborative led by Somerville, CHA, with partnership from Cambridge Health Alliance and from Tufts University. We do not yet have vaccines available for that regional collaborative, which was supposed to be kind of a hub and spoke model where, you know, and those communities aren't served by a community health center. Really, you know, they're more served by CHA, which is not getting vaccines from the federal program. So we have made progress, but I think there's still a ton more to be done, particularly in those communities that have hard hit populations, but aren't part of that 20 hard hit communities. So, but Mayor Spicer, I'd love to hear from you of your thoughts, you know, in terms of being a hard hit community, how that's going for you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I will say that, first of all, we have made tremendous strides over the last couple of weeks working with some of our community partners, whether it be our community health center, our Brazilian center, resource center. So we have at least 5 or 6 different entities that we are working to get vaccines to people, going directly into the housing developments and giving vaccines there. Speaking languages, having pop-up food distribution, but also vaccine. So you can get a vaccine and get groceries at the same time. And just since March 24th, we have vaccinated 2,700 people. And that's in our equity clinic. So it's really making sure people understand why it's important to have the vaccine, making sure information is in their native language. There are people on site during the vaccinations that can speak their native language, and it's going quite well. And I'm very pleased with the progress, and we send out teams of folks. Our nurses are going to these sites to do the vaccination, along with our medical reserve corps team members are also there to help out. So we've got it down to a pretty well-oiled machine, and you're absolutely right. It's not so much the hesitancy to receive the vaccine, it's having accessibility and transportation, if need be, to get to some of the sites, and that's another thing we have worked out with our local MWRTA to provide rides. So if they can't get to one of these sites, we can get them to another site too. So and right now in Framingham, my city has 47,000 people that have had at least their first dose of vaccine. And that's pretty good. My city is about 75,000 people. So we are making our way towards herd immunity, slowly but surely.
I think that's great. And that, you know, 2 things, the taxi program that Sam referenced, but, you know, so that money is actually going to RTAs like the Metro West RTA across the state, as well as cities and towns. And it can help, you know, the funding is available to support that transportation. We also launched, and I'll ask Heidi to share, a platform that's trying to share a lot of the communications materials, make it available for all of our cities and towns. You know, everyone has populations they're trying to reach. And so we're taking, you know, good materials that we see across the country from local communities, you know, from the Mass League, for example, and putting it all in one place. So that's another tool that we're trying to put out there. And then, you know, lastly, George, one of the things we're really advocating for is there was a really successful program for senior affordable housing where there were special doses set aside and funding available to help do clinics in senior affordable housing. We really feel like the same should be made available for family affordable housing, particularly now that everyone is eligible. Again, that gets at that access issue, but yet we haven't yet been successful in convincing the administration to launch a parallel program in family affordable housing.
Well, appreciate all the efforts and the thorough answer from both you and Mayor Spicer. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. I think, Buzz, did you still want to ask your question? I saw you unmute, then mute, then unmute.
Well, since you called me, I will. It wasn't really a question. It was to pile on the commendations to not only Lizzie and the staff, but virtually every department. I would commend that everybody read in the executive director's report. There's a link to the comments MAPC made on the climate plan. And it's like 15 pages long. It covers, and as some of you know, I'm fairly involved in the climate change world. And this is probably the best I've seen, certainly in its ability to link equity, social needs, and more than anything else, the idea that the state is just ignoring land use as potentially in land use development. So yeah, I think it's really good. I would urge that everybody read it. There is a link in the executive director's report. I muted myself again because this discussion was going so long, but you called on me, so thank you.
I didn't want to have you miss that opportunity to share your thoughts, especially if you're going to be so filled with praise for staff, which is so well needed. Rebecca, I wasn't sure if you wanted, because I see a new staff member here, I wasn't sure if you wanted to introduce and welcome just really briefly.
Yeah, great. We have the hiring continues. We are still filling all of the positions we didn't fill, but it looks like Allison Zimmern is joining us. She is new in our legal team, and this is, I think, her third day. So Allison, do you just want to say a quick something about yourself, introduce yourself to the executive committee?
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Allison Zimmern. I'm very pleased to have joined the MAPC, and I will be working as legal counsel along with Marjorie Weinberger and Jennifer Garcia. And I'm just fascinated by the discussion I'm hearing today, and just I'm soaking it all in and just so impressed with the work everyone is doing. So thank you.
Hey, welcome to the group, Allison. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Welcome, Allison. And since you're going to be one of our legal counsels, we hope to see you, but not very often. So at least participating in that way. So, exactly. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And Rebecca, I think Mark's going to owe you some lunch because you definitely went above and beyond to not only give his report, but also answer a lot of really great questions and part of that discussion. So thank you for that. Okay, next up is the report of the Legislative Committee. We have a lot of legislative updates, and lucky for us, we have our Legislative Chair, Keith, here. So Keith, I'm going to call on you and you can kick off this party.
Thanks so much, Erin, and hello, everyone. The Legislative Committee met on April 14th, and you'll hear at this meeting a number of things that we talked about, but I just wanted to mention that one of the action items is on federal transportation and climate legislation. So please know that our committee did vote to recommend that the executive committee act favorably on those matters. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Lizzie Wyant, and thanks so much, Lizzie and staff. We're just so grateful for all of the hours all of the long hours over a long period of time, much too long for the legislative affairs. But thanks so much for all you do for us.
Thanks, Keith. I really appreciate that. Nice to see everyone today. So I'm going to turn it over to Kasha Hart on my team in a second to walk through the 4 federal bills on which we're taking a position today. But I wanted to let everyone know quickly that the House is taking up the budget this week. Things are actually returning to more of a normal schedule right now inside the State House, which in and of itself is amazing and sort of blows my mind a little bit. But importantly, we started off the budget cycle really well this year. So the governor proposed level funding for DLTA and Shannon, and the House took up both of those line items as level funding. So it actually allowed us to sort of thank the House for their leadership on DLTA and our Shannon priorities. We have weighed in with a number of amendment priorities that we would really like to see the House take up. It does not seem like they are actually inclined to do that. Our number one ask on an amendment priority was around increased public health funding, and they declined to take that up yesterday in their budget deliberations. But we do actually have some high hopes for the Senate moving that number quite a significant amount higher. We sort of went into the budget process knowing that the House was unlikely to bump that number. We did have, again, a number of additional amendment priorities. We've sent around a handful of action alerts on it, so you should have already seen those, and we're kind of happy to send it around again if you'd like. But because we have 4 bills up for consideration, I'm going to turn it to Kasha. As Keith indicated, there was unanimous support for all 4 pieces of these legislation. Kind of as a reminder of the framing of the conversation, we know that we're going to actually be involved a lot more on federal issues this session, just because that interplay between the federal and state legislation right now is particularly important as we look to recovery. And these 4 bills are actually things we've been watching for actually a number of years. A couple of them were refiles, and one of them is actually very sort of near and dear to MAPC's heart. That's particularly on the Complete Streets legislation, because Senator Markey reached out to us when he was drafting it for help with some of the language. So we think he got it right. So I'm going to turn it over to Kasha to let her explain these pieces of legislation. She's going to go through all 4 of the bills, and then we'll take questions on them at the end. So Kasha.
Great. Thanks, Lizzie. Good to be with you all today. I know we are a little behind schedule and there's 4 bills here, so I'll try to go through the 4 as quickly as I can, and please chime in the comments with any questions or feedback you have. So as Lizzie mentioned, really all 4 of these bills play some sort of role in building a cleaner and more equitable transportation system. And if folks recall, I think it was 2 months ago, maybe at this point, when we brought our priorities for an equitable economic recovery to this group. We did have a whole section on aligning our economic recovery with our housing, climate, and transportation goals. And so we feel that these bills help us move in this direction. And while there's a lot the Commonwealth can do on its own, obviously the federal government does have a really big role to play in all of this. And I do just want to note, Senator Markey has actually introduced all 4 of these bills. So we're very grateful for his leadership on these issues, and we were grateful to have been joined by a member of his staff at Legislative Committee who helped walk through some of the details of all of these. So I'm going to kick things off, just go through the memo that we circulated. First is this Complete Streets bill. Should look really familiar to a lot of you. Nick Downing, a former government affairs staffer, played a really big role in drafting the Massachusetts legislation on complete streets. And so this bill is actually very similar to how the Massachusetts Complete Streets program functions. It would require states to set aside a portion of their federal highway dollars to establish a complete streets program. That program, again, very similar to what we have here in Massachusetts. Municipalities would have to adopt a complete streets policy, develop a prioritization plan, all of those same mechanisms for expanding walking and biking infrastructure. Next is the Green Streets bill. So this is really intended to confront the growth in transportation emissions associated with more driving by establishing goals for reducing vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. So, Buzz actually got to this a little bit in his reception of our comments on the CECP, but obviously electrification is essential to reducing transportation emissions, but by reducing VMT through increased investments in transit and walking and biking, by enabling more compact and walkable development, we can actually unlock a lot more co-benefits in addition to reducing GHG emissions. So this bill would require the Secretary of Transportation to establish VMT and GHG reduction standards for states to use. And it also requires him to establish a compliance mechanism to ensure that we're actually making progress towards these goals. So the third bill that we want to talk about is the Freedom to Move Act. This was also introduced by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. So this is really about investing in our bus system. I think folks know that bus ridership has been the most resilient during this pandemic, and a number of folks who are bus riders really are transit dependent. And so this bill is really about supporting folks who need transit the most. It would create a $5 billion competitive grant program to offset the costs of providing free or reduced bus fares, actually I think all transit fares, and invest in a number of different bus-related capital and operating improvements. The last bill is the Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection Act. So this is really about using community-driven processes to collect data and identify demographic factors, environmental burdens, socioeconomic conditions, and public health concerns that are all related to environmental justice. So this would ensure that future requirements to invest in underserved and overburdened communities actually does yield meaningful investments in environmental justice communities. I think that's probably the quickest summary I can give of these 4 bills, but happy to answer any questions or take any feedback folks have.
Erin, Ms. Robert, I have a question.
Go ahead, Bob.
I lost my camera, so you're going to have to just hear me. Thank you for that legislative update. I have a question about the vehicle mileage tax. I remember when I was the deputy commissioner of Mass Highway and attending the hearings that Steve Silvera had when he chaired the Transportation Finance Commission 15 years ago. And we spent a lot of time talking about the vehicle mileage tax. You think it stands a chance? I'm a firm believer in it. I support it. Do you think 15 years is enough? I think we're going to get something on that finally?
I think from your mouth to God's ears, Bob. I will say there is a lot more conversation on the federal level right now about looking into VMT and encouraging states to actually implement pilots on the state level to see how it could work. I do expect that the surface transportation reauthorization will create another opportunity for states to do those pilots. And a number of years ago inside the state budget process, there was actually language that ended up being vetoed by the governor that would have actually more or less required MassDOT to entertain that pilot. We did not end up doing that. But I do think that there is more appetite on the federal level to actually look at that, particularly as we know that the gas tax revenues are declining and are poised to continue to decline with EV adoption and more widespread EV adoption. And so there's certainly, a lot of advocacy at the state level to try to push for that. And I do think that if there is an opportunity for a pilot, for the state to enter a pilot that would be supported at the federal level, that we would want to try to push for that. MAPC, just again, to remind folks, has taken a position in support of looking at VMT as an alternative and or a supplement in the meantime to the gas tax.
And it makes, again, my feelings, it makes all the sense in the world. From where I live in Lexington, which is one of the more affluent suburbs in this area, and we have the highest per capita number of electric vehicles in our town. So we have people that can afford to pay taxes, not that I'm advocating for more taxes, and we have an electric vehicle and we don't pay any gas tax. And we use the roads. It's just, I'm on my soapbox. Thank you.
Inclined to agree. I see other questions. I'm happy to facilitate, Erin.
Yes, can you please? Because I can't see where other people are asking. Yep.
Yeah, I saw Steve and then I saw Karen. Steve will know.
Yeah, I had a question on these individual laws, how they interact with the renewal of the FAST Act. Does doing these things mean it's highly likely they'll be in the renewal of the FAST Act, or maybe not, or how does that all work?
Great question. I think so. The FAST Act is the surface transportation bill that we know has to be reauthorized because it expires this year, and we are hoping that Congress will actually take up a new surface transportation bill, mostly because we have in years past seen continuing resolutions, but we're sort of in a good moment to actually take up a new and innovative surface transportation bill. So part of our thought about taking a position on these 4 federal bills is that it would give us an opportunity to actually advocate to include some of these provisions inside the surface transportation bill. Their chances, it's tricky. I do think there is actually more appetite for something like complete streets and a little more infusion of data transparency inside surface transportation this year, reauthorization. So we are hoping in particular to try to infuse some of those pieces inside surface transportation. It's possible that surface transportation will be one of the places where they decide not to push for some of those more innovative pieces because they are trying to also pursue this separate infrastructure bill. And that might be the place where some of those more innovative policy ideas come to light. So we'll see. But I think that if we can weigh in with our delegation in support of some of these pieces, we can at least let them know that there's certainly interesting and innovative policy levers that we would want to see. Karen, I think you're up next.
Thanks. Actually, it's a very similar question. It just, is there any talk of, especially for either the complete streets or the freedom to move, being swept into the infrastructure bill conversation? Is that more, is that an avenue?
I think that the freedom to move bill would be more likely to be swept into the infrastructure bill, and complete streets actually more on the surface transportation bill. And I think folks know I'm generally agnostic on the vehicle as long as it gets across the finish line. I don't totally care what we use to get it there. But I think, again, the freedom to move, I think that the infrastructure bill is likely, my gut is that it's likely to be the place where we see more innovative ideas. And so I could see freedom to move kind of, or again, even a pilot around that being included in that as an opportunity for states to take advantage of. And we would be very supportive of this conversation about fares and transit fares is really heating up in the transportation circles right now. In fact, that there's a good chance we're going to bring some items back to legislative and executive committee for further discussion. But obviously that would be one we would very much want the state to try to take advantage of if there's a pilot opportunity in either of those. Yeah.
I think there also just is an outstanding question of how the infrastructure package would move, whether it would be through reconciliation or other mechanisms. And if it is through reconciliation, that does limit the number of policy provisions that you can include, is my understanding. So yeah, I think we're looking to elevate the ideas, not thinking too much about the vehicle.
Definitely. I see Sandra.
Thanks, Lizzie. So this all sounds great. I'm just wondering, so I'm assuming the bottom line is that the hope is that Massachusetts would get more funding for some of these initiatives and that it would trickle down to the local level, and also either that or incentives for BMT or whatever. I'm just trying to figure out how it's going to impact, municipalities. And I'm just assuming that that's how it would work.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is always that, I think a lot of these things are ideas, especially on this list, are ideas that have actually already gotten some traction at the state level, right? It's already something that advocates are talking about. And so if we can actually cement some of these programs at the federal level, we think that we as Massachusetts, where we already have a number of these ideas already on the ground, would be better poised to be able to take advantage of federal dollars and then again, match it with potential state dollars at the same time. So our goal is always to make sure that we're maximizing opportunities for municipalities and for the region. And I do think that if we move some of these programs at the federal level, that'll ultimately benefit all of our cities and towns in the region. I think that's all I see on questions.
Sandra, I don't know if you were saying anything else. You were on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just doing a quick follow-up. So if we approve these today, that means that you will be able to talk with the rest of the delegation about these and ask them to support them. Is that what we're basically approving?
Yep, exactly. I was just going to say we'd love support so that we can weigh in with our congressional delegation. And also a lot of what we're doing right now is talking to our state legislators about stuff that's happening on the federal level, because there's just so much that's moving. And so it'll also give us an opportunity to talk to our state level legislators about some of these federal items as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kasha and Lizzie and Keith, of course, for your synopsis and answering questions. And thank you to those who participated in conversation and listened and feel like we can move forward with a motion, which I would love to take at this time.
It's Keith. I'll offer one if you wish. I would move that the executive committee adopt the favorable recommendation of the legislative committee to support these measures as presented by staff.
And I'll second it.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Keith, for that motion. I had John, sorry, Sandra. I had John as the second. So without any other further discussion, so we can kind of keep this moving, I'd like everyone to go off mute. I understand that some people might have to abstain. Obviously, you have the right to do that or vote against, whatever. So I'm going to go a little slower than usual just to make sure we capture those votes appropriately. Okay, everyone, here we go. Sharonda?
Aye.
John is out. Keith?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Adam's absent. Bob? Cohen?
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone. Tom Daniel?
Aye.
John DePriest?
Yes.
Yolanda? Sandra?
Yes.
Mo, I think left. Jared? Tabor?
Yes.
Steve Olenoff?
Aye.
Caitlin?
Abstain.
Okay. George?
Aye.
Courtney, I think, had to leave. Jenny? Vandana?
Abstain.
Sam?
Yes.
Steve? Silvera?
Aye.
Lauren? Shirtliff? Mayor Spicer?
Yes.
Juan? Elaine?
Abstain.
And Erin, aye. So the motion passes with 3 abstentions. I believe the abstentions are Caitlin, Pasafaro, Vandana, and Elaine. Did I get that correct, everyone? Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Legislative Committee. Those who are here, and please share our thanks to them, Keith, at your next meeting. And thank you to the government affairs staff for all your hard work on all these great and important topics. So thank you so much. Next up is the Metro Common May ! On the agenda. And I believe we're going to hear from the co-directors of the Strategic Initiatives Department, Emily and Eric, as well as Kasha, again, from the Government Affairs Office. So I don't know who's going first, but someone take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. I'm joined today with Emily and Kasha, and also just wanted to say thanks to Sasha Prodi for all her help in prepping for this meeting and every other Metro Common related meeting and event over at least the last half year. I'm going to share my screen. We have a little presentation for you, really focusing on what's been happening the last couple months, and then the final months ahead, with a big request and ask for people to get involved with Metro Common May, which is our last big effort at collecting public feedback. So believe it or not, we are in the home stretch of the plan. It's been a 3-year planning process. And the last few months has really been focused on engagement around particularly the policy and programmatic recommendations of the plan. We kicked it off early in the new year, which has basically been turning into an annual event with municipal leadership, focusing on long-term issues, confronting our cities and towns. Had a really fantastic event, and even were able to make a donation to a food bank in lieu of being able to actually provide actual food. And then we've really pivoted into the policy focus groups. We've had 11 of these over the last 3 months. There's been really great discussion. These are really subject matter experts, people that kind of live, work, and breathe the issues that we're writing about in terms of the recommendations. And I'm going to be joined just in a little bit by Emily and Kasha to give you a flavor of the kind of feedback that we've been getting from these discussions. We had a really fantastic research release on housing submarkets, looking at the particular housing characteristics, really unique throughout the region. And we really believe this will turn into a tool to help direct policy and investment interventions that really are more tailored to what's happening in these specific typologies. Again, similar to the Zoning Atlas event earlier this winter, we thought this might be a niche event, but really attracted a huge crowd and had a really dynamite panel of experts in the field, really from a number of different perspectives weighing in. And then Emily, in particular, has been leading up our mini grant community partner work. We're actually been able to provide funding to connect with community members. And the point here is really to make sure that we're not just talking to subject matter experts and municipal leadership and grass tops, but also people that are really likely to be most impacted by the recommendations in the plan. And you'll hear from Emily. We've been talking to people really across the region, including youth. So that's been a really great partnership, both with groups that we've worked with in the past, and in some cases, some brand new organizations or brand new to MAPC. So this brings us to MetroCom in May. This is really our last big push for public engagement around the contents of the plan. We're really trying to push it out there through all the channels. We're reaching out to everybody that's engaged in some way, shape, or form with MAPC and the regional plan update over the last 3 years, and also going really broadly publicly for even people that maybe haven't been part of the process, but want to make sure that if people have thoughts on any of the recommendations that they really have the opportunity to weigh in. And that is the top focus. We have 20 policy chapters that we're pushing out into the world, and really want to hear people's feedback on what we got right, any gaps in there, any modifications we can make to make these recommendations even stronger. We'll also be putting out what we're calling Actionary Narratives. Just a reminder, we have 5 main topics that we're really focusing on in the plan. So these narratives are really fairly brief, but they're meant to provide the context, some history in terms of how we got here, some of the big challenges that we face, and then they really provide the context for leading into what we're proposing as the solutions, which are the recommendations. And then finally, if this group remembers, a couple of years ago, we brought to you the provisional goals. They were endorsed by the executive committee. We'd like now, as we're in the last few months of the plan, to finalize the provisional goals. So we are pushing those back out to see if people have any other thoughts or comments about adjustments that we should make to those as well. We're kicking off the event May 3rd, the MetroCom in May, putting it out to basically our big list of contacts really throughout the region. May 4th, we had this really gifted filmmaker we worked with who put together a short film called Living Together. It highlights 5 individuals or household stories, a really diverse group of individuals, and we're going to be joined at that event. It's our little red carpet event, but we're going to be joined by the filmmaker and 5 out of the 6 participants of the film. So please keep your eyes out for that. We'd love to have you there. It's a short film. It's only 18 minutes, but pretty powerful. I'm a little bit sappy of a guy, and I was definitely crying both times I've reviewed it. And then we'll continue to push out the publicity around the recommendations, really reaching out to everybody through our subregions, through our newsletters, through press, asking them to take a look at any of the recommendations that they're interested in. On May 10th, we're asking all staff and if any executive committee members would be willing to really push out the ask to your networks, people that you think would be interested in weighing in. I should mention the format that we have the recommendations in. They're not long written narrative documents that we're asking people to comment on. They're really the outline. So it will have the strategies and the actions. And it's actually in survey form, so people can select however many of the recommendations they're interested in looking at and just provide their feedback right through a survey. And I will say, especially for executive committee members, we're happy to sit down with you and talk through any of them as well. We really value your input and want to hear what you have to say. And then we do have a few additional focus groups pivoting to legislators, and aides coming up in mid-May. Co-sponsored event with our clean energy and environment team with Heat Week, another mention of MetroCom in May. And then we'll come back to you at the end of May to let you know kind of how it went and want to report back. And then the schedule for kind of the end of the plan, wrapping up June, particularly Lizzie and Kasha are going to be incredibly busy sorting through the feedback and making those final edits to the recommendations. Meanwhile, the rest of the team will be compiling and finalizing the other components of the plan with the goal of getting it up on the MetroCom, what we call the digital hub, on June 30th. We'll bring this to the final external advisory committee for asking their endorsement of the plan and that they recommend it to the executive committee. We're planning for late July to come back here with the full plan for hopefully your recommendation. And then over the summer, we do have a few more research releases and press events that will be kind of pounding the drum on, generating excitement with the launch event and scheduled for September after the full council hopefully adopts the new plan. And the timing for that is early September. And then the hard work begins where we're no longer writing the plan, but we're actually implementing the plan and working with partners. With that, this is just kind of a repeat of the MetroCom in May asks. We'd love for executive committee members to talk it up. Please send the link to the survey to your contacts, and we'd be happy to sit down as well to talk through any of them. I'm going to pass it over to Kasha and then Emily to talk just a little bit about what we've been hearing so far in the policy groups.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. And I do just want to echo what you said about having conversations about the recommendations. I'm certainly really eager to hear your feedback. So if anyone would find it helpful to talk through your thoughts on any of these, I'd be more than happy to sit down and bring in the relevant policy writers as well. So we thought it could be helpful just to summarize what we have been hearing in these 11 focus group sessions. I would say at a very high level that the initial impression that we've heard from folks is that the recommendations are very comprehensive and content rich. I'm actually very glad we opted to do the outline format for engagement moving forward, while the recommendations in their final form will be the narrative. The outline format I've heard from policy writers was helpful for actually pulling out what exactly is it that we want to recommend. And this is not to say that the recommendations are not without their gaps, but that has generally been a first impression that we've heard. We have 20 different policy recommendations and they all are really interconnected. And so we heard from a lot of people that it would be really helpful to call out connections across specific recommendations and just to find a way to do so in the digital representation of the recommendations. And we are thinking of different ways to make it clear how connected these different strategies and actions are. In some cases, we heard that some of the recommendations felt a little too broad. People wanted to know what their marching orders were. They wanted specific actionable ideas without, anything being too prescriptive. So we are working on honing in and refining some of the ideas that we've presented. A lot of the feedback on how we can make our recommendations stronger entailed either shifting the recommendation so it more directly addresses a root cause of a problem, or expanding the number of people who would benefit from a specific action, as in, changing program requirements, expanding who's eligible for funding for a specific program, et cetera. And finally, we've gotten a lot of questions around how we will pursue implementation of these recommendations. I think, we have some initial ideas using our legislative agenda, but that is certainly an ongoing question that we're all all discussing internally. Would love to talk with you all about as well. Next slide, please. So just to share some more concrete examples of what has been coming up during these focus group sessions, I went through and just pulled out 1 or 2 takeaways from each of our focus groups. There are hundreds of comments. Major kudos to Sasha Parodi, who cataloged all of these. I think she probably knows the exact number, certainly in the hundreds. So just wanted to offer a very, very small sample of what we had been hearing from folks who attended the focus groups. So for a more participatory and inclusive government, we heard a lot around building upon existing community engagement infrastructure and really establishing active partnerships with community-based organizations and local governments in order to facilitate engagement on local planning efforts. We have a series of recommendations around decarbonization. Those, not surprisingly, rely very heavy on electrification. Folks wanted to see more focus on recommendations to improve grid capacity and resiliency. A lot of talk about trees. When we talked about our open space recommendation, folks wanted to see some more concrete ways we can incorporate strategies around tree protection bylaws and ordinances in that recommendation. We had some language in one of our mobility recommendations focusing on trails. We were encouraged to think more broadly about pedestrian and cyclist needs, since trails felt it was a little bit more of a suburban focus. Folks encouraged us to have a more holistic focus on pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. We were encouraged to have our mobility recommendations take a stronger focus on safety and intermodalism, if that's a word, and interoperability. So again, thinking about transportation planning from a holistic perspective, looking across all modes and not just transit, but walking and biking infrastructure, bike share systems, et cetera. We heard a lot of feedback about our public safety recommendation. And I think one takeaway that I had was folks were particularly eager in that recommendation for us to be very clear about the other recommendations that we have that influence public safety, particularly affordable housing and workforce development, although there are others that are certainly relevant. As we talked about our housing recommendations, folks wanted to see some more language around reducing the racial homeownership gap and just a consideration of this sort of challenge around homeownership being really a primary vehicle to build wealth in the United States. Next slide, I'm almost done. We need more diverse funding sources available for affordable housing preservation, not just increases to existing funding sources. There's interest in more recommendations focusing on the needs of older adults. Our public health recommendations are generally pretty focused on early interventions. And so there's a desire to see some more actions focused on the needs of older adults in our public health recommendation and others, I would say. There's a desire for more metrics, some more concrete deadlines and goals in some of the recommendations. The supplier diversity goals, that was an issue that was raised when we talked about our small business recommendations. We had thought about changing the Mass Hire Workforce Board geography. Folks encourage us just to make sure that that is paired with increased funding. And finally, when we were talking about our arts and culture recommendations, we talked a lot about procurement. I don't know if Allison is still on the call, but there is a lot of discussion about how procurement is often a barrier to advancing arts and culture strategies in cities and towns. So with that, I think there's enough from me. I'm going to turn things over to Emily to talk about the mini grant engagement that we've been doing.
All right, thank you, Kasha. Can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So what was really wonderful about the engagement that we did was that we weren't just talking to quote unquote experts about the policies, but we wanted to hear people's lived experiences and really see how people reacted that would be actually most impacted by the policies, like Eric had said. We partnered with these organizations. We're still looking for 2 more organizations so that we can do some in-language focus groups in Chinese and Haitian Creole. We are doing some in Spanish and Portuguese, but I just wanted to go over some of what we've heard so far. And to be clear, we've only had about 3 or 4 of these. We will be having much more focus groups in the next month. So some other sort of takeaways. These conversations were, I would say, more emotional and a lot more sensitive than the ones that we had with experts. And people were, I think, in a moment of kind of frustrated hearing about these policies that may not take effect or may not impact people for another decade. So I just wanted to put a little note on that. But as we explained who MAPC was and what this project was, people sort of were like, okay, well, we're glad that you're here. We're glad you're talking to us. I just wanted to kind of note that. People talked about sort of the discrimination and the customer service, really the level of service that they felt they were receiving from different agencies and programs. They talked a lot about housing. I'd say that is a topic that really continues to get pulled out. Cost of housing is too high, sort of the need to define affordability, what is the missing middle, and addressing that. I'm not going to repeat some of the things that Kasha said. Young people wanted to be able to fully participate. We had some teen focus groups. Also, public safety was brought up, and sort of this distrust of police and youth kind of talking about decreasing resources to policy and instead bringing it back to the community. And youth were saying in the future they would like to minimize interactions with police. That should be the goal. So I just want to say how we heard similar things to the other focus groups, but again, these were much more experience-based, and language was very important. I just want to end on that topic. We are having the equity committee internally take a look at our language. Our external advisory committee for MetroCommon also asked us to take a look at the language that we're using. And as an example, we had a very lively debate on the term sort of youth offender. And so youth were kind of giving their perspective of how that felt to them, seeing that on paper. I can get into more detail if you'd like, but I just think language is important, and we will be looking at that over the course of the next 2 months as we clean up our MetroCommon document. Thank you, everyone. If you have any follow-up questions, let me know.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, Kasha, and Emily. That was really comprehensive and to the point, and I think it really kind of gives us a clear understanding of what's before us, and I think gives a really great kind of synopsis of things that you're being really intentional on, like language, syntax, how you approach engagement, all things that we know are really important, but it's really great to hear that we're not just kind of shaving the surface in some regard. So I'm not sure if anyone, I see Sandra's hand, and forgive me, I have 2 pages of faces here. So if I don't call on you right away, it's just because you're on page 2, but I will call on you. So Sandra?
Thanks, Erin. Thanks to the team. It's just amazing. Just the work is incredible, and the month of May sounds really busy for you, but also for us. And I'm definitely planning on really reading the information carefully, giving my own feedback, but also sending it out to my networks. And in particular, I'm hoping to write something for my local online newspaper in Bedford, asking people to weigh in for this survey. And I hope other people will do something similar. But along those lines, I'm wondering if we will get a really nice, concise description that we could adapt for our own use. I mean, if I had to start from scratch and to describe this, it would take me a long time. So if somebody could really provide some sample text for what we might send to people, both maybe in an email, but also if we want to try to publish it, that might be a little bit longer, but something that will really help us launch this, because otherwise, it may or may not happen. So any help you can give us in that regard, even though I know you're incredibly busy already, would be really appreciated.
Yeah, great point, Sandra. And Emily and Sasha have already been drafting template emails and template resources. So we will definitely get those out to the executive committee. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Sandra, for bringing that up. And thank you for those who are working on assisting us to facilitate the outreach. Anyone else? Let me check page 2 here. Hold on. Anyone else? No? Great. Well, I guess that means that everyone is super jazzed like the rest of us. I don't want to speak for the, yeah, thumbs up. I don't want to speak for the executive committee, but I know I as well will commit to pushing out to my, networks and platforms to make sure, eyes are on this and you're able to get other kinds of feedback as well. Anything else, Emily, Kasia, or Eric, before we move on? I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all again for your work on this and the external advisory committee and all the stakeholder groups and stuff like that. Like, I know I'm on all those emails and I know how hard these groups meet and how great their discussion is, and the document is really starting to reflect all that hard work. So with nothing else, thank you so much for joining us. May looks exciting, and I know, I hope that everyone, participates in the various May events. Okay, next up on the agenda, I see people in the chat, and we're wrapping up as we speak, but if you could just hold on if you can. I know an amendment just came out from the State House, but we're finishing up here. So next up on the agenda is an update on the annual council meeting and nominations for elections. If you have enjoyed, before we get into the update, if you have enjoyed your time here, even if it's on Zoom or watching this from home and would like this to be you one day in this box and you're a representative, please think about submitting your interest in serving on the executive committee. There are 5 representatives for each executive committee seat, minus the city side, which is 1 standard seat that is reserved for the city of Boston, but there are 4 seats available for the city side. Everyone is up for re-election every year. So if you ever feel like this could be really fun or engaging or an interesting experience for you, I definitely want to recommend, whether you reapply to run or you put yourself out there for the first time, I definitely recommend you do so. So I don't know if it's Heidi or Rebecca wants to give that up. It looks like Heidi because she's unmuted. Yeah. I love that. That's my current social cue. Who is going to talk? Who is on mute? But go ahead.
Just a reminder to everybody who's currently on the board, if you are going to renominate yourself, if you could do that. I had sent a form out, but you don't need to use the form. If you haven't returned it already, just send me an email saying that you plan on you would like to run for that seat again. And that will be it. We'll keep it easy and keep it by email. And thank you to everybody who's already nominated themselves.
Right, and I'll just add, please mark the date on your calendar. Is it May 29th, Heidi? I want to get that right.
26th.
26th. Flipped it upside down. All right, May 26th, we'll be having our elections again on Zoom. So really important that you show up, and thank you to everyone on the nominating committee. We actually met before this meeting and approved the slate. All of our officers are running again. So please show up to the meeting. I think it will be Metro Common themed, as we're in the midst of Metro Common May. And we promise to have, fun, interactive ways to all get together virtually. So. And I'm sure we will have the film available for you to watch. If you can't make the premiere, we will make sure we send out the link. It's an excellent film, so I really recommend everyone taking some time to watch it. Great, I think that's it.
Great, and obviously the annual meeting is super important, even if those who are watching either live or at home or wherever you stream this meeting, if I do encourage everyone to go to the annual meeting. Anyone that's a representative or an alternate or just a super fan of MAPC, I would encourage you to attend the annual meeting. We do conduct business other than elections. And obviously there's topic areas that Rebecca mentioned, and it'll be a great time. And hopefully, I mean, I'll say that with my fingers crossed, that it will be hopefully our last annual remote only platform meeting. Fingers crossed. Okay, great. All right, next up on the agenda is other business not known at the time of the posting. Rebecca, do you have anything for the group? Love it. So I want to just commend us as well. I know we started a little late due to a tech issue. I know we had a lot of topic areas to talk about for the legislative side, and we had a lot of great updates for Metro Common, but we are still ahead of schedule and on time. And I really appreciate everyone who's been able to stay either for the whole meeting or just part of the meeting. I know everyone's time is really valuable and we're getting pulled in a million directions, but I really do appreciate everyone taking the time to share this space with us this month. Oh, sorry. Sandra, did you have something?
Did we mention the council meeting is May 26th?
Yes.
We did. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I missed it.
Nope, you're just super excited. Thank you, Sandra. I look forward to seeing everyone in this way as well for that meeting. So if anyone would like to, I would love to entertain a motion to adjourn at this time.
Make a motion.
Okay, I see John
Second.
DePriest made that motion, and we'll have Tabor, yep, Tabor is going to second that motion. Thank you so much, John and Tabor. Don't log off yet. We got to do the vote. Hold on. I'll be really quick. Everyone go on mute. I know some people left, so I'm going to run through it really quickly. So here we go. Sharonda, John, Keith.
Aye.
Karen left, Adam, Bob, Mayor Curtatone, Tom Daniel.
Yes, Robert said yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Tom Daniel, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. John DePriest,
Yes.
Yolanda, Sandra,
Yes.
Mo, I think left, Jared, Tabor,
Yes.
Steve Olenoff,
Yes.
Caitlin had to leave, George had to leave, Courtney had to leave, Jenny, Vandana,
Yes.
Sam,
Yes.
Steve Silvera,
Yes.
Lauren, thank you. Mayor Spicer.
Abstain.
Oh, okay. You just want to be like the group, right? Juan?
No, I had stepped away for a moment. So.
Oh, we're voting on adjournment. So if you want to abstain,
I'll change my vote. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Juan? Elaine?
Yes.
Great. And Erin votes in favor. Thank you so much, all. Motion passes and the meeting is adjourned at 12:53. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. I will see you all next month. And until then, stay healthy.